Hey everybody, it's Craig Syracusa. Welcome to another episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited. It's early in the morning, but we're up early to sit down with Dr. Dan and Catherine to discuss Purposeful Lab. And I mentioned to you off camera, last night I was doing research and I got hooked on the AI. And all of a sudden, just from watching a lot of the short videos, I found myself in a rabbit hole doing all of this research. So I want to thank you for that, Dr. Dan and Catherine, so much.
I'm glad you came back out of the rabbit hole.
So tell us, in case our audience is not familiar with Purposeful Lab, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. Well, Purposeful Lab is a podcast where it's myself, a journalist, teaming up with Dr. Dan Kuebler, a scientist, where we're sitting down with these top experts and asking big questions about the universe and ultimately looking at the abundant order that is in the universe, from the cosmos to the human person to looking at the order of each and every one of us and the purpose that we each have.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is we look at the science. We bring in biologists, chemists, physicists, and we talk about big topics. But science always raises bigger questions, so these meta questions. So we bring in theologians and philosophers as well to discuss, what does it mean that the universe is structured this way? What does it mean that the humans are structured this way, that our brain works this way? How do we make sense of that in sort of a bigger picture? And that's where it's really a blessing to bring in philosophers, theologians, scientists from field. I'm a biologist, but from other fields, I learn a lot when I bring these guests in, and it's a really enjoyable to have their expertise as part of this podcast.
And Catherine, you are a Catholic journalist. So how does sort of your take and your interpretation, how does that work within the show from your background?
Oh my goodness. I think, when you're a journalist, you really know that you're a non-expert. You're learning from the experts. And so I really feel like a perpetual student, especially in this case. And I really see my role, again, non-scientist, as we're speaking with these experts. And again, like Dan said, it ranges from scientists to theologians to philosophers, really the best minds there are in their specific fields. But I see myself as, okay, I want to make sure that all of this, for those of us who are not experts in these fields, that this is accessible to every single person. And so I think that's important to know. If you don't come from a science background, you are welcome to come and join us and listen. And this is for you. If you don't come from a faith background, that's okay. Come in and listen. This is for you. It's really for everyone. But I know it's so humbling, Craig, to sit down with these great minds, Dan included. I've constantly learning and in awe. And frankly, even when it comes to my faith, like when you realize, oh my goodness, the more you learn, you realize more and more how big God is, and just how his brilliance, and that I can't even begin to fathom just all the complexities there are in the universe.
It's amazing. And I agree, because even just like looking at some of the videos, like whenever I read, if I watch documentaries about ETs or I watch about AI, it brings me and draws me closer to my faith. And certain people would think it does the opposite, but it does. It brings me back into his word and just reading more about and thinking more about God and not putting him sort of in this box that he was able and he was able to create this massive universe. How does Dr. Dan, how does your experience and your background as a biologist, sort of work into the show as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a biologist. I'm also an educator, so I've spent my career teaching undergraduates and some graduate students biology, trying to make it accessible to them. But in my teaching career, we always run up to I teach about evolution. I teach about just the order, the structure of the universe, and so that always leads to these deeper questions. And that spurred me to do a lot of research and looking into the philosophy and the theology behind creation. What is the Catholic teaching on creation in terms of what does it mean that God's the creator of all of this? And so you start to see the interconnections between science and how that leads you to these ultimate questions. Right? You can't answer them, but it leads you to them. Science should, if you're approaching it, I think, in the proper way, lead you to humility at the wonder of creation. And I think a lot of even atheistic scientists, when they have this feeling of awe and wonder at the majesty of creation, whether they're looking at the largest level or they're looking at small cells, they're gorgeous, and they usually bring this sensation of awe if you really appreciate what you're doing. And I think that is something that and I've experienced throughout my career. And I want, to people to see science as something that brings them, like you said, closer to God. And that is, the Catholic understanding of the world, that there's this unity of truth, that everything that we study, everything we look at, if we look at it in the proper way, we are going to be brought closer to God. We're not going to be able to answer all these questions. So it's not like Catherine and I are having this show to answer everybody's questions about it, how science fits. And that's the beauty of it. There's all these interesting questions that people have pondered for millennia, and that we can still ponder and discuss. And what does the latest science tell us that might help us shed more light on these ultimate questions, right? But a lot of them are ones that, like I said, go beyond the science.
Interesting.
I just had kind of a thought there as well. I mean, I feel like our culture, tell me if you think this is fair, Dan, but really idolizes science in a lot of ways and kind of says science is the end all be all. And we have this healthy respect for science, but it's been humbling to see these top scientists even say, here are some questions that physics can't answer. Here are some questions, that this field can't answer. And that's been really great to see as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Catherine. We have a neuroscientist that we'll have on the show. Is going to talk about what can neuroscience tell us about the brain and the way the mind, the human brain works, but what can't it tell us? There's certain things about the human mind that it's not going to be able to explain, right? So recognizing the limits, what science can help us explain, but there's a limit to what it can explain, particularly about the human person, or even physics. What can physics explain about the structure of the universe? Like physics can explain, well, the universe is structured this way, but then that opens up this bigger question. Well, why do we live in a universe that's structured this way? Why is it? We could have find ourselves in any universe. But this is the specific ordered universe we find ourselves in, and those are questions that the ancient philosophers pondered and wondered about, and a lot of that has been lost on modern education and the modern mind. We don't even I think that wonder has been taken out of education in a lot of places, and so trying to bring it back here to I have a lot of students that come into my science classes, just tell me the answer. I'm like, well, no. Science is not just I love that we don't know the answer to a lot of these things. This is the interesting aspect of science and scientific discovery, and so bringing that back is another aspect of the podcast.
No, it's interesting. Yesterday, I was telling my son about the interview, who's still sleeping. And he started asking me questions. He's 7. He started asking me questions like you just said, like, why does the earth rotate? How do we, explain gravity? All these questions. And I'm like, I got to have him call office hours, because I know you guys have office hours on the podcast, because I always try to answer questions. He'll ask me about heaven and hell and, people passing and souls. And I'm like, how do you explain that to a 7-year-old where he can comprehend that? And my wife's like, you get too deep when you try to explain it. So I'm like, I'm going to have him reach out to you during office hours, and maybe he can ask these questions. Because how do I explain to my son about gravity, or about why the earth rotates, and why, why are we even here? Like these questions that we all ponder and wonder, it's difficult to answer them to, or, respond to a 7-year-old. So
yeah, definitely is. I mean, everybody sort of age appropriate of what you can respond to, but even if they're an adult, there is a limit you come up with where it makes sense. I think from a logical, it's reasonable to assume, because of the order in the universe and the way it's structured, that there's a reason, there's an order behind it, there's a source of that order, the logos, right? That's an eminently reasonable position, and that's why we're here. But at the end of the day, you're taking that on faith, but it's not because it's an unreasonable position, but faith and reason go together there, right? And so trying to explain that to a 7-year-old, good luck with that.
I'll have them call. What are some of the topics? I mean, I know I looked on social media and I looked on YouTube and I was watching a lot of the short clips, but what are some of the topics that people can expect season 1 and season 2 and so forth and so on?
So we just wrapped up season 1. So if you want to catch up, go to your favorite podcast platform, go to YouTube, go to modulcenter.com, and you can catch up on season 1 ahead of season 2, which we're working very busily on right now. But season 1, we really gave this, overarching introduction to all the topics that we're really hoping to tackle and that we will cover throughout the course of Purposeful Lab. So again, starting with cosmology, we looked at biological evolution, we looked at physics, but again, we looked at philosophy as well, and even happiness, the topic of happiness and purpose, and how there is actually an order to our happiness and how we experience happiness the way that we do. And we did that with Father Spitzer of Modulus Center. So a huge range, and Dan can probably speak to more of that as well, because again, part of our hope and goal there was starting big, starting with the galaxy, the biggest you can, and then honing down eventually down to the individual, and ultimately how each and every single one of us are created with a unique and intentional order.
Yeah, that's a great overview there, Catherine. And a lot of the topics are things, maybe a 7-year-old might ask, like how did the planets and how does the galaxies and solar systems form? That's one of the things that we talked about in season 1. And then out of the order of evolution, how do organisms form? And that's something that we talked about. And then how is the brain structured? That's something, and how does that play into our sense of right and wrong, and how God has produced human beings to be in relationship with him, right? And so those are topics that we'll continue to look at here in season 2. So we'll have a neuroscientist on, we'll have another cosmologist on, but then we'll also have a theologian to talk about, what are the limits of what we can know? What are the limits of human knowledge? We are finite creatures, and that plays a role into both science and theology. So these are the type of questions that we're going after.
I love it. And one of the topics too, I was watching AI, which is, extremely popular. So I was showing him yesterday the ChatGPT, and we started writing letters to my puppy. And I started to show him and then it's interesting because I think you have a video that says about the 5 things that humans versus AI, right? It was on, I think it's one of the videos you have. And I think there was one thing at the end that I think you said, not you personally, but there was one thing that I guess AI cannot reproduce. And it was self-awareness. I don't know if you recall that video that was on your site. I found that to be extremely interesting, especially when you look at AI and ChatGPT and how it's formulated. We use it when we do graphics and we just created a graphic the other day, and we took different, products and different sort of perspectives, and we created this product from using AI. But that's something that especially kids, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds should be introduced to at some point, because we know that is the future. How do you feel about AI, especially when it comes, say, within, our faith?
Yeah, I think AI, it can be a great tool, but it is a tool, right? And so any tool can, it changes the way we see the world, but it's someone that can be used properly or can be used improperly. But I think one of the things you hit on that we mentioned, that AI just can't become self-aware, and this goes to the nature of what we are as human beings. And this is someone we had on the podcast talk about the fact that based on the physics cannot explain why you're conscious, why you are self-aware, Craig, of what's going on around you right now. It doesn't flow out of the physics. It's one of the great mysteries of science. So why are we self-aware, and why are we and from a Catholic perspective, we say that because we are a unity of body and soul, and that it goes beyond the material being. And AI is nothing but a material being. It's nothing but an algorithm. So an algorithm could solve a lot of problems, but it's never going to be aware that it's solving the problems and decide, what, today I'm going to solve a different problem. I just feel like, I know you want me to do graphics for you, but today I'm going to make cookies, so AI, it doesn't, have that, that freedom, that self-awareness, and that creativity that we have. Even those AI programs that can make Picasso paintings, the paintings. It's not you're telling it exactly what to do, and it has some parameters, and it does it. It's not suddenly going to come up with a new form of art that it's expressing meaning. Like we do art, we're expressing meaning to other people because we're self-aware and we want to have relationships. And AI just doesn't have that, and I just don't think it ever can, just because of what it is.
Catherine, what are some of your favorite topics so far, would you say?
So one that sticks out to me from season 1 was episode 5, I believe, speaking with Dr. Kuebler, who's a philosophy professor at Christendom. And we talked about how what we can learn about ourselves from nature. And ultimately, the takeaway that I got from that conversation was order is good. Discipline is good. And actually, we as humans really thrive in that when we have a rhythm and intentionality to our life. And so that was even just very practical for me. Speaking of AI, I'm just kind of thinking of what a great tool to use in some ways. But I think in our fast changing technology that is happening right now, we're seeing different jobs get replaced by technology. We're seeing, I think, people grapple in a new way with what is my purpose? What is it I can bring, to what can I contribute? And I think in a new way, we're seeing people really grapple with this sense of what is my purpose? We're really in a crisis of purpose. So I think even speaking with Dr. Kuebler and then speaking with Father Spitzer as well about levels of purpose and happiness. And again, that order rhythm is good. I really hope, and I know I did, I really hope viewers and listeners will take away some key lessons that they can integrate into their life to better thrive once we learn kind of more about the design that we all have, and really thrive and embrace the purpose that we all have.
You touched on two really important things, and I've been saying this from the pandemic. I think the pandemic was sort of like this reset where people took a step back and really reflected on what is my purpose, what is my true calling. And you see a lot of people during and after the pandemic where they completely changed their whatever they were seeking, their jobs, their education. They really pulled back and they really focused on what God was calling them to do. And I hope that continues way beyond the pandemic. But very interesting point. One thing that comes up all the time, whether you want to say aliens or ETs, which I think is also a topic. And, you're probably familiar with the Webb telescope, right? So now we know that's going, 1 million miles away. Now there's probability, or is there a probability that we will find out that there is potential life in another galaxy? How does that affect the truth, right? Our belief system, Christianity, what we've learned growing up in the Bible. How does that, I mean, it's very challenging to ask, but I'm assuming you've thought of that question before, Dr. Dan. So how would you answer that, or if somebody had that question?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's two questions there that I would focus on. One is, what is the likelihood, that there's intelligent life elsewhere? And at this point, we just don't know. We don't have a good understanding of that, of how likely it is, because we don't understand exactly how we got into, we have broad strokes of how intelligent life came on this planet, but we don't really understand. So I'm kind of agnostic on whether there is there intelligent life on other planets. I'm kind of agnostic. We've had guests who really think there would be, and we have others that think no, there wouldn't. But then, as you point out, then there's the corresponding theological, philosophical question, C.S. Lewis examines this in his Space Trilogy, and I think he was open to this idea of intelligent or rational life on other planets. I think Aquinas was actually mentioned something like this and is open to that, because it doesn't necessarily mean that our relationship with God is in any way diminished, right? I think it may mean that God is greater than we actually have assumed. It doesn't change the fact that we're fallen and we rely on Christ's sacrifice for our redemption. That's not going to change if we find extraterrestrial life on another planet. So I'm certainly open to that idea, and theologians, good Catholic theologians, have speculated on what that might mean. So I think it's one of those things that it's an interesting question. It's a fun one to talk about with even a 7-year-old, right? As we said, yes. And to speculate, what would that mean? And it opens up their thinking, and they start to think about theological and philosophical questions and scientific ones. So I think it's a fun question to wrestle with, because it focuses on what does it really mean to be human.
Interesting. So tell us now. So you have the plan is 5 seasons. Is that correct? 5 seasons. And how many episodes are in each season? And when are you going to start rolling out, say, the second, third, fourth season?
Yeah. So there are currently 6 episodes per season. We just wrapped up season 1. So again, really encourage people to go check it out. And then season 2 will launch in late September is the plan. So the best thing to do is make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That way you'll be alerted and it'll be just right there on your phone once we release.
But yeah, I really appreciate it. And like I said, I'm going to have my son reach out to you through office hours. I found myself just really diving into the content, and to see how many people have been watching the show and those shorter clips, very impressive, very impressive.
Thanks so much for having us on and for mentioning office hours. Yeah, we are encouraging people send in questions that you have, especially if these episodes, bring questions to mind. Go to majacenter.com. You'll find everything about the podcast there in a way to send us questions into the episode. But another thing I just love is that our faith encourages us to ask big questions, right? We don't have to be afraid to ask these big questions. And again, we welcome all of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not only sending questions, but if you have ideas for future, hey, this is something I really would love you guys to talk about. We can find a good guest that would be an expert in that field, and we can dive into that topic, and we're more than open to that. So people can go and not only send questions in, but those suggestions as well. So.
And you said one of the most important things too is that sometimes in our faith we feel uncomfortable asking these important questions, and therefore we just sort of go through life wondering. And a show like this gives us that ability to feel comfortable enough to ask those really important questions that we struggle with. We all struggle in some area, and picking up the Bible, yes, it answers the questions, but to hear it from a doctor and a journalist, a Catholic journalist, it really impacts and inspires us in a different way. So I really commend you and thank you for that.
Oh, thanks, Craig. Yeah, it is, and it's. I think these questions are ones that people often think, well, if I start to ask these, I'm going to lose my faith, and I think it's the exact opposite. If you focus on these questions from the right perspective, it's just going to deepen your faith and make it stronger.
Exactly.
Well, I agree. Well, I advise people to log on to watch the podcast, watch the AI one. You have a lot of really good videos, a lot of good guests, and I look forward to becoming a fan. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through your words and actions. God bless you.